Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Ethan Peters. I think he had a name like Ethan the Supreme or something like that. Was more like an online name. He was more known by that name. And the thing about this is he was only 17 years old, and he was like a YouTube sensation. I believe he also had a very prodigious following on Instagram. First thing I want to offer, if any of his friends or family members happen to see this video, I want to offer my condolences, of course, to them. And when I saw this online, I don't think they have a confirmed death for him, but he had one friend anyway that speculated that they thought it was due to some drug overdose, and he apparently had some kind of drug addiction. First thing I want to talk about, his birthday, March 8th, 2003. Of course, I don't have a time of birth for him, so I had to improvise once again and do a solar/sunrise chart. March 8, 2003, I got Houston, Texas as the birth place, and March 8, 2003 puts his sun at Pisces, of course, moon in Taurus, moon, of course, in its exaltation. They're probably a very good listener. He probably was very, even though being emotional sun in Pisces likely had emotion as far as his moon goes, being in Taurus, that helped modify things a little. His little bit emotions probably were a little bit more subdued, because Taurus is a very calm, placid, tranquil sign. But Taurus moon at the same time can be if they're provoked, they're provoked persistently, they can unleash, I would say, pretty good amount of anger and emotion, but that would be more to determine goading. But the thing about it is, in Taurus, of course, is a very impassive sign, so again, I would say he probably, being the sun in Pisces, had certain emotion, still strong emotional energy, but the moon in Taurus did modify this to some degree, because Taurus is not known to be emotionally exuberant, and that is a placement of his moon, and the moon, of course, is associated with emotions. But the thing about the thing I look at, about what he actually did. He was somebody, I don't know what his exact his position or title is. He was only 17 years old, and the thing about this is what I want to first talk about. I'm going to talk about some natal placements and transits that he had that may have contributed perhaps to his death, as far as things astrologically that might have been connected with this. Now, he was only 17 years old. I don't know what his title was, or if he had an actual profession. Only 17, but he did something associated with beauty and cosmetics and makeup. He perhaps used some creativity and ingenuity with this. He did something pretty special with this in order to amass the prodigious following that he did. One thing, that's standing out is that transit Neptune was very close to his natal sun at this time. Neptune is the sign of suicide. Sun in Pisces, and Pisces is the sign associated, sadly, with suicide and drugs. When you have transit Neptune close to one's sun, regardless of the signs that the planets are in, that could sometimes indicate the dissolving or dissipation of one's life. It's in the sign of dissipation, dissolving. The sun is about life, and Neptune can be about dissolving, dissipation. It's also, planet is associated with drugs. It can be connected with addiction, and it's also, again, going back to, it's also associated with suicide. So, and he also at this time in the solar sunrise chart had transit Chiron and Aries in the first house. The Chiron can sometimes, and not just about emotional wounds, it could be about physical ones as well. It is retrograde, so it's more like, it's likely, I mean, you're talking about where self-inflicted wounds can, or hurt can be more prevalent when you're talking about transit Chiron in Aries when it's retrograde. Another thing too, I've talked about this in previous videos, that, again, not to be redundant with this, but for those of you that are just speaking of following, have just started to follow my videos and haven't seen a lot of previous ones, what I've stated is that when you have in your chart, if you have a T-square configuration and you have a transit planet that is making an opposition to the focal point of that configuration, often significant events can transpire. Now, in his chart, he has a mutable T-square configuration consisting of the Sun in Pisces, and it's squared by Saturn in Gemini and Pluto in Sagittarius. Pluto in Sagittarius making the opposition to Saturn in Gemini, and it's also, what I'm saying too, it's squared by the focal point, Sun in Pisces. His Sun in Pisces is actually, based on the solar / sunrise time, it is at a critical degree at 17 degrees. The Saturn in Gemini is at 22 degrees, though not seen as a critical degree. It's still 22 degrees. Some astrologers see that as it could be an adverse or dreaded degree, regardless of what sign it is in. 22 degrees in astrology is a critical degree for fixed signs, but the 22nd degree can still be seen as abhorrent to some astrologers. I do see it as it can be a dreadful degree, even when it's not in a fixed sign. It's more emphasized, I would say, when 22 degrees is at a fixed sign, because 22 degrees again is critical. Now, when you're talking, and at this time, he had transit Sun in Virgo, making, you'd call a loose opposition to his natal Sun in Pisces. The Sun is about our life, it's about our vitality, our energy. Pluto is involved in this configuration. Pluto, of course, is about death. Saturn in Gemini, Saturn can be about depression, despondency, feeling some kind of restriction or limitation. He has Saturn in Gemini. I mean, it doesn't mean he had this, but he might have felt to some degree that maybe he was somewhat inhibited in some cerebral ability or comprehension or assimilating information or versatility. It's in the 4th house. He has Saturn in the solar sunrise chart. Saturn in Gemini is in the 4th house of the end of life. But I think too is that when you're talking about Saturn being in Gemini, Gemini is the sign also associated with your early education. And I'm wondering if this, the fact that he became very prolific, a YouTube star and sensation, maybe even you want to say the word renowned might describe him, that detract to some degree from his early education, and was there some despondency and sadness associated with this? So anyway, and the thing about looking at this as well, and having the transit Virgo in the 6th house of health, making that opposition, Virgo can be rather worrisome energy. It could be somewhat negative. The Sun is also, it's connected with the physical body as well. It is about life. It is in the 6th house, transiting the 6th house of worry in a solar sunrise chart. When you have a mutable T-square configuration, what it tells me, it doesn't tell me, I know that mutable T-square configurations can bring about certain, T-square configurations can bring about certain tribulations and conflicts and many obstructions and delays, but when you have it in mutable signs, it can bring about a lot of worrisome, anxious, nervous energy. So this also occurred around, well, I don't know if this actually happened sometime well before This was reported. I just saw this on Yahoo News today at the time I'm uploading and publishing this video, but maybe this happened earlier. But it's interesting that when this came out, when I saw this, this would be at a time when he would be having his lunar return in Taurus. And the zodiac sign Taurus can be associated, it's with self-worth and self-esteem. This transit falls in the second house of self-worth and self-esteem. And he also, at this time, he had transit Jupiter making a conjunction to his natal Chiron. And I've taught in Chiron in the sign of despondency, depression, Capricorn. And as I've spoken about in previous videos, is that Jupiter, though it's very strongly benign and benevolent, could also, it's paradoxical to be very strongly benign, benevolent, but could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. And sometimes when you have transit Jupiter hitting one's Chiron, it can enlarge and expand some kind of, whether it's physical wound, propensity for physical wounds or emotional ones. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. Now, the thing about this too is now, he also, transit Pluto was not far from his natal Chiron at this time. And again, as you know, Pluto is about death. And this is, sometimes, when you have transit Pluto and Chiron involved in a conjunction and transit, sometimes I believe it can manifest in some kind of suffering that would be associated with one's death. And sadly, another thing I noticed too in his chart is that he had transit South Node in Sagittarius was had separated, maybe you could say fairly recently separated his natal Mars in Capricorn. Mars in Capricorn. First, when you're talking about the South Node, when it has made a separating conjunction. And it, even if it's involved in the conjunction, I would say, of a planet, it is often indicative of what energy one may be going away from. Mars and Capricorn could manifest in putting a lot of energy and vitality, taking action, aggressive action in matters pertaining to one's ambitions, one's career, gaining stature and recognition. It also is in his 10th house of notoriety and exposure and recognition. It's in the 10th house in his solar sunrise chart. So when you have the transit South Node, when South Node is involved in a transit, it can, and when it's in a conjunction, it had been in a conjunction at some point earlier, could have been 2 months, maybe a month or two prior to this point in time. But at some point within maybe 2 months, it was likely making a conjunction to Mars. So it was something that maybe he had been contemplating for some time, that he was going to somehow, maybe he was going to take at least some kind of step back or going away from all this ambitious energy and vitality that he was putting into matters with his career and attaining a greater stature in life, or what have you. Transit Saturn and Pluto are also in his 11th house in the solar sunrise chart. Saturn can restrict and limit, and the 11th house is the house of friends and acquaintances. I'm wondering if this might have done something to him socially, as far as his friends go. Was there some kind of limitation connected with this as a result of his career? Transit Pluto, unlike Saturn, transit Pluto can flat out obliterate and destroy. This may have done something to where his friendships, where he didn't have much of an actual life as far as his friends go, his acquaintances go at this point in time. Another thing I am seeing in his chart, though, is that he does have, one thing I've noticed, that he has Venus conjunct Neptune in the sign of Aquarius, the sign that could be associated with the internet, social media. Venus and Neptune. Well, Venus and Neptune by itself may be manifest, maybe the realization of one's dreams or fantasies, doing something connected with beauty and art, and the fact it's an Aquarius done in a rather innovative manner, perhaps using, doing something, expressing some ingenuity by doing this, and even doing so through social media, since Aquarius can be associated with that. But also, even Venus conjunct Neptune by itself could also be about maybe making money in connection with filmography, and that could also include YouTube videos. Now, and I'm sure, I don't know if he had his thing set up for monetization, but I'm sure he did, as far as his YouTube channel goes. Another thing I want to get at is that in his natal chart he has Saturn squaring his sun. So I don't know the situation with his father, if he was alive or not, but maybe there was some, something, maybe there was a conflict with some kind of authority or father, perhaps, as far as maybe a conflict with what he, as far as what he wanted, who he truly was, which is the sun in Pisces, which of course could be an idealist, a dreamer, somebody that wants to make their fantasies into reality. But as far as the basic character goes, which is the sun, maybe somebody that might be seen as a little bit unrealistic and overly idealistic, a person that may really be, might be seen as a little bit delusional. That might have been, but that, I'm not saying that was the case entirely with him, but that might have been, that you're talking about. Saturn is making an adverse aspect to one's sun. I do believe it increases the propensity for some conflict with the father in many cases. And anyways, really not much more wanted to get at as far as this goes. And also, I wanted to say too, he's also going through a nodal return at this time as well. And transit North Node in Gemini was actually not far from his Saturn in Gemini. What wouldn't be, it's not considered a conjunction by transit, but it wasn't far from it. You can say and argue that it was a loose conjunction too. When you have the North Node involved in transit, it can be about issues one may have to address or confront. Now, the fact that it was not far from his, at the time it was in his fourth house. It's near his, again, very close, not far from his Saturn. Saturn could be about the career. Saturn, we were talking about, maybe this was a career where he showed some diversity, or maybe he was spreading himself too thin, so to speak, figuratively speaking, and something where a lot of communication was involved, where he had to really, speak well and articulate himself. And this was some issues where he may have had to address, but also the fact that Saturn could also rule despondency, sadness, depression. Maybe this was some issues that he had to deal with as well. Maybe he had some doubt in connection, again, going back to maybe cerebral ability or communication skills, or this had something to do, some sadness connected with having a limited, maybe there was something limited regarding his early education that he was experiencing, and that might have been tied into all the notoriety and acclaim he received based on what he was doing on his YouTube channel, and I guess Instagram as well. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.